Rusted gate creaks open, revealing salt trails and ozone-rotting flower stench. Arlo Harrington's knuckles whiten on the ledger's edge as the ink bleeds into the paper, the words dissolving like sugar in rain. Harrington, Arlo. The name vanishes, leaving only a ragged hole where it had been. The ledger's paper rasps like dry skin under his palm, each crackle a tiny death knell. He presses harder, seeking purchase, but the paper yields, crumbling to dust between his fingers. The silence presses against his eardrums, thick and suffocating. The sudden absence of the station's usual hum. The hum of the generator, the distant groan of ice shifting, now a void that feels like a physical weight. Then, from the drain beneath the desk, a sound, a slow, wet exhale, like a lung emptied of air. Arlo Futh. The whisper is thin, reedy, but it's his name, clear as a struck bell, yet distorted by the drain's metallic throat. He freezes, heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, aggressive pulse in his chest. Impossible. The records are sealed. No one knows I'm here. The air tastes of copper and cold stone. The cat emerges from the shadowed corner where the bioluminescent fungi glow, a soft, sickly green that clings to the walls like mold. Its metallic silver fur clinks faintly as it moves, each strand catching the fungi's eerie light, silver strands weaving through the green. The cat's eyes are dark voids, reflecting nothing. It pads toward him, silent except for that constant, soft Tuvan clink, clink, clink of its fur against the cold floor. The clock on the wall ticks steadily from tick-tock, 60 BPM. Steady as a heartbeat, yet it feels wrong, too precise, too deliberate. The cat's movements now sync with the ticking, each step a metallic chime against the ledger's spine. Tick. The cat's front paw lifts, fin clank, the ledger's spine fin tick. The cat's tail flicks, a silver whip against the ledger's edge. Clank. The drain exhales again, a hiss like steam escaping a ruptured pipe. The whisper rises from it, no longer thin, no longer distorted. It crystallizes. Arlo, clear, sharp, cutting through the radio static that suddenly floods the room. Not the usual white noise, but a high-pitched, distorted twin hiss that vibrates in his teeth, merging with the drain's whisper. The clock's Sivan tick-tock accelerates, the Thivan tick sharper, faster, tick-tick-tick-tick like a frantic pulse against the Fibonacci of the radio. The cat's fur clinks against the ledger's erased entry, a final, metallic tweet-chime that echoes the drain's crystallized whisper. Arlo Ha. The name hangs in the air, cold and real, as the cat's silver fur presses against the empty space where Arlo Harrington's name should be. The drainage map was a spidery mess of lines scrawled on brittle parchment, a cartography of unseen channels beneath the station. 72 beats per minute. The clock's rhythm had tightened, a relentless pulse against the silence. 72A, it felt wrong. Not just fast, but fully wrong. Like a calculation performed with corrupted data. The hiss from the drain had ceased, leaving only the clock's insistent ticking and the faint toothy clink-clink of the cat's fur as it moved along the ventilation duct. The air tasted of dust and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old pennies left to corrode. I traced a finger along a particularly convoluted route on the map, the paper's texture rough and granular against my skin. The luminescence from the fungi cast long, skeletal shadows across the room, distorting the familiar shapes of the equipment. It made the station feel less like a scientific outpost, and more like a mausoleum, a tomb for forgotten ambitions. Harrington 4. The name was gone, erased. A void where my name should be. It wasn't a simple deletion, it was a negation, a severing. The sensation crawled beneath my skin, a phantom itch I couldn't scratch. The cat paused at the ventilation duct, its silver fur catching the sickly green light. Each strand seemed to vibrate with an internal luminescence, a faint, unsettling shimmer. It tilted its head, those dark, bottomless eyes fixed on me. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to flee, to burrow into the earth and disappear. But the ledger, the map, the lingering question of my vanished identity, they held me rooted to the spot. I pressed my ear to the vent, the cold metal biting into my skin. The sucking sound was faint at first, a whisper against the clock's ticking. Then it sharpened, distorted. Arlo. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a pressure, a physical force against my eardrum. The clock's ticking fractured, splintering into a staccato rhythm, son tick tick tick. It was a mockery of a heartbeat, a frantic, desperate plea. The metallic scent intensified, coating the back of my throat. The cat's fur shifted, a cascade of silver against the duct's seams and fine clink clink. Clink, clink. Each sound a tiny hammer blow against my sanity. I recoiled, pulling my ear away from the vent, the distorted echo of my name lingering in my ears. The map trembled in my hand, the ink bleeding slightly in the damp air. I felt a surge of aggression, a raw, visceral need to destroy something, anything, to break the oppressive stillness. But I forced it down, swallowed it, the taste bitter and acrid on my tongue. The drain exhaled again, a low, guttural rumble that resonated through the floor. It wasn't air that escaped, but something heavier, something wet. I imagined a cavern beneath the station, a vast subterranean lake teeming with unseen things. The thought sent a shiver through me, a coldness that had nothing to do with the Antarctic climate. The luminescence of the fungi pulsed faster, their sickly green glow illuminating the map with an unnatural intensity. I focused on the map again, trying to decipher the convoluted network of drains. Each line seemed to writhe, to shift, as if the station itself were alive, breathing. 72 beats per minute. The clock's rhythm was no longer a measurement of time, but a countdown. A countdown to what? I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sounds to cease, the smells to fade, the visions to disappear. But they only intensified, pressing in on me, suffocating me. The cat moved again, its silver fur a fleeting shimmer in the green light. It wasn't walking now. It was gliding, floating along the ventilation duct, its movements impossibly smooth, impossibly silent. It reached the clock, paused, and then with a final, deliberate teeth-fin clink, its fur brushed against the clock's face. The staccato footick transformed into a frantic drumbeat. Tick, 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 tick. The drain's rumble grew louder, a subterranean roar. My name, Fodi Arlo, was swallowed by the accelerating rhythm. The map tore in my grip, the brittle parchment fracturing into 1,000 useless fragments. The glass was shockingly cool beneath my fingertips, a slick, unyielding surface. I traced the oval frame with a slow, deliberate motion, the metal cold enough to numb the pads of my fingers. 90 beats per minute. The clock's rhythm had become the architecture of my anxiety, a relentless mechanical pulse. It wasn't merely measuring time, it was at 40 becoming time, compressing it, stretching it, distorting it into something unrecognizable. The luminescence from the fungal growth seemed to concentrate around the mirror, bathing it in a sickly emerald sheen. The silver cat, a static sculpture of metal and shadow, watched me, its head tilted at an impossible angle. I pressed closer, my breath misting on the glass. The reflection wasn't immediate, it lagged, stuttered, as if the mirror was struggling to capture my image. When it finally solidified, it wasn't quite me. The eyes were wrong, too wide, too vacant. The mouth, a thin, bloodless line, held a trace of something akin to amusement, a mocking smile. I blinked, and the reflection mimicked the action, but with a delay, a subtle distortion. It was like watching a puppet, clumsily controlled. The room beyond the mirror wasn't the laboratory. Not anymore. It was a churning expanse of black, viscous water. Not water, precisely. Something thicker, heavier, that absorbed all light. A sea without surface, without horizon. A void. I could smell it, a cloying metallic tang that coated my tongue, that tasted like old pennies and brine. The clock's rhythm accelerated, pushing past 90, past 100. The drumbeat wasn't just audible, it was visceral, resonating in my chest, vibrating in my teeth. I reached out, my hand hovering over the reflective surface. The air around the mirror felt different, static, charged. The silver hairs on the cat's back stood on end, each strand a tiny quivering antenna. The clinking sound, once faint, was now a brittle chime, a chorus of tiny bells signaling an approaching storm. It brushed against my cheek, the cold metal a shock against my skin. A pressure built behind my eyes, a dull ache that threatened to blossom into a migraine. The water in the reflection roiled, and a figure began to emerge. A man dressed in the same clothes I wore, the same severe, high-collared coat. But his face was contorted in an expression of utter despair. He was drowning silently, his mouth open in a perpetual scream. He reached for me, his fingers skeletal, translucent. I recoiled, stumbling backward, my hand finding nothing but cold air. The drumbeat intensified, a frantic, accelerating rhythm. 110, 120. The cat's fur scraped against my face. A sudden, sharp force crack echoing in the room. Not a sound of impact, but a fracturing, a splintering. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. When I opened them, the reflection had changed. The drowning man was gone. In his place was nothing. Swirling void, the mirror's surface seemed to ripple, to dissolve. I could feel a pull, a suction drawing me forward. I tried to scream, but my throat was constricted, paralyzed. The drumbeat had become deafening, a relentless pounding rhythm that obliterated all other sounds. It wasn't a sound anymore, it was a physical force, a wave of pressure that threatened to shatter my skull. The cat, no longer static, leaped, landing on my shoulders, its metallic fur digging into my skin. It wasn't supporting me, it was twin pushing. The glass yielded, not with a crash, but with a silent, fluid surrender. I fell forward, into the blackness, into the churning void. The drumbeat replaced my heartbeat. The cat's fur clinked against my cheek as I descended, the sound fading as I fell into the mirror's depths. The drumbeat led me, like an obedient dog on a leash, through the labyrinthine corridors of this forsaken station. It pulsed in my ears, reverberating against my skull, syncopated with the rhythmic glow of the bioluminescent fungi that coated every surface, like some sickening mold. The clock's rhythm had become indistinguishable from my own heartbeat. I could feel it in my chest, a persistent throb that seemed to echo through my entire body. The fungi pulsed too, their light flickering on and off with an unsettling regularity. It was as if they were communicating, exchanging some silent signal amongst themselves. Their glow was cold, casting everything in a harsh, clinical blue that made the world seem alien, otherworldly. The shadows it cast seemed to writhe, twisting into grotesque shapes that danced at the periphery of my vision. The vent I sought was tucked away behind an ancient, forgotten cabinet. Its surface was slick with condensation and grime, the metal flaking off like diseased skin. As I approached, the drumbeat intensified, resonating from within the narrow shaft like a trapped beast pounding on its cage doors. The fungi's glow here was almost blinding, their rhythm accelerating to match the clock's feverish pace. I pried open the vent with my knife, the blade screeching against rusted metal as I forced it wider and wider. With each inch gained, the drumbeat grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to fill not just the room but my very being. The fungi pulsed in time too, their light flooding the narrow tunnel like a tidal wave of spectral blue. I could feel something out there, beyond that sealed-off space. Something ancient and malevolent that slumbered beneath layers upon layers of forgotten time. It was calling to me through the drumbeat, whispering promises in that pulsating rhythm. I knew it wanted me to come closer to enter its domain so we might be united once more. But there was a part of me, footy, some vestige of sanity clinging on like a desperate lifeboat amidst stormy seas, that screamed for me not to listen. That reminded me of the cat's cold metal fur against my cheek and those skeletal fingers reaching out from the void within the mirror. It cautioned against giving in, warned of what lay beyond this threshold. Yet despite these warnings, I found myself crawling into the vent regardless. For even as fear gripped my heart like a vice, there was something else 240, an inexplicable compulsion that drew me forward with irresistible force. The drumbeat had become not just sound but sensation, resonating deep within me until it felt less like external noise and more like the very blood pumping through my veins. And then, as I reached out to touch the fungi's pulsating light, there came a single, deafening font piece. Everything went silent. The drumbeat stopped abruptly, its rhythm cut off mid-tempo. And in that sudden absence of sound, the world seemed to hold its breath. The device felt cold against my palm, the metal biting into my skin. I angled it, attempting to capture the luminescence of the fungi. The sickly blue glow pulsed, a rhythmic heartbeat against the oppressive black of the vent's interior. It wasn't a clean recording. A high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible at first, threaded through the visual data, a parasitic noise clinging to the edges of the image. The clock's tick, which had become the rhythm of my existence, fractured within the whine, splintering into a chaotic spray of static. It tasted like corroded metal, a phantom tang on my tongue. The cat, Silas, shifted beside me, his metallic fur clinking softly against the metal of the device's casing. A dry, brittle sound, like wind chimes made of bone. He didn't purr. Silas never purred. He simply existed, a silent, silver sentinel, his eyes twin chips of obsidian reflecting the fungal glow. I tried to ignore him, to focus on the recording, but his presence was a constant, unsettling weight. A reminder of a past I couldn't quite grasp, a vengeance I didn't understand. I adjusted the focus, attempting to isolate the fungal bloom. The static intensified, a rising tide of noise threatening to drown out all other sensation. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against my lungs. It wasn't the weight of the earth above, but something else, something internal. A pressure building within my skull, a silent scream echoing in the hollows of my bones. The recording showed the fungi, their pulsating light a hypnotic dance. But the static was warping the image, distorting the blue into something unsettling, something wrong. It was like looking at the world through a fractured lens, seeing the truth refracted into 1,000 grotesque shapes. I felt a tremor run through my body, a physical response to the escalating dissonance. My hands shook, making the recording jump. "Focus, Harrington," I muttered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I needed to maintain some semblance of control. The vent was a claustrophobic tomb, the darkness pressing in, the static assaulting my senses. I leaned further into the opening, the metallic scent of the vent's interior filling my nostrils, acrid and suffocating. I needed to see what lay beyond, to understand the source of the drumbeat, the reason for this insistent pull. Silas's fur brushed against my face, a cold, unsettling caress. I flinched, instinctively pushing him away. He didn't react, simply remained, a silent, watchful presence. His eyes, those chips of obsidian, seemed to bore into me, judging, knowing. I hated him. I resented his silent observation, his unwavering gaze. He was a constant reminder of my failings, of the darkness that clung to me like a shroud. I tried to breathe, to regulate my pulse, but the static was overwhelming. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a feeling, a presence, a taste. The taste of corroded metal intensified, coating my tongue, filling my mouth with a gritty, unpleasant residue. I swallowed, trying to dislodge the sensation, but it lingered, a persistent reminder of something lost, something broken. The recording continued, the fungi pulsing, the static screaming. The device felt heavier in my hand, the cold metal seeping into my flesh. I wanted to drop it, to cast it aside, to escape the oppressive weight of the vent, but I couldn't. I was trapped, bound by the drumbeat, the static, the silent judgment of the cat. Then, a shift, a subtle alteration in the static's tone. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was forming, coalescing into something recognizable. I strained to hear, to understand, but the static was a chaotic maelstrom, a swirling vortex of noise. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain behind my eyes, a pressure building behind my temples. My vision blurred, the fungal glow dissolving into a swirling kaleidoscope of color. And then, through the static, a whisper, a voice distorted and fragmented, struggling to break free from the noise. It was faint, barely audible, but I heard it. I knew it. It wasn't a sound from outside the vent. It was inside my head. It resonated within the marrow of my bones, vibrating against my eardrums. The static warped, contorted, twisted into a recognizable form. It solidified, sharpened, until it coalesced into a single, chilling utterance. My name, Arlo Harrington, whispered directly into my ear. The mirror shattered beneath my fist, glass exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. They tasted like electrolyte pads on my tongue as I licked my lips, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the salty residue. Each fragment was a tiny, jagged starburst, reflecting the sickly blue glow of the fungi pulsating behind me. Silas stepped onto the broken mirror, his silver fur clinking against the glass like wind chimes made of bone. The sound grated on my nerves, each metallic rasp sending a jolt through my body. It was as if he was marking territory, claiming this desecration as his own. The reflection in the shattered pieces twisted into something unrecognizable, warping and distorting until it showed me nothing but fractured light. But there, amidst the chaos of glass and blue glow, I saw her again, the Victorian woman drowning in a sealed bath. Her eyes were wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream as water filled her lungs. I felt no horror at seeing my own death played out before me. Instead, it was a cold detachment, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold on a cinema screen. This wasn't the first time I'd seen this reflection, nor would it be the last. It was becoming familiar, almost routine. The clock's tick echoed in the sudden silence of the room, each second stretching into eternity. The air grew heavy with anticipation, pressing against my lungs like an invisible weight. My heart pounded in my chest, a rhythmic drumbeat that seemed to synchronize with the pulsating fungi behind me and the ticking clock before me. Silas's fur clinked again as he moved closer to the reflection, his obsidian eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. His tail twitched once, twice, then stilled completely. He was watching her too, this ghostly echo of myself, waiting for something. The reflection began to scream silently at us, mouth open wide but no sound escaping. The glass around it vibrated with the effort, each shard trembling as if alive. I felt a corresponding vibration in my chest cavity, resonating against my ribs like some discordant tuning fork. Then came the first note of static, that high-pitched whine from earlier, now louder and more insistent than ever before. It wormed its way into my ears, burrowing deep within my skull until it felt like my brain was filled with buzzing bees. The sound intensified, growing sharper, harsher, a grinding metallic roar that threatened to drown out all other sensation. The reflection's scream grew louder too, even though no sound reached my ears. It manifested as physical pressure instead, pushing against me from within the shattered mirror, like an unseen hand trying desperately to break free of its prison. My vision swam with blue and white light, pulsating in time with the static's assault on my senses. I stumbled back away from the mirror and whatever force was attempting to burst forth from it. Silas remained where he was, unfazed by the cacophony around him. His fur clinked against the glass one final time before he turned towards me, those obsidian eyes reflecting nothing but cold calculation. The reflection's scream reached a crescendo, then abruptly cut off as suddenly and violently as when I'd shattered the mirror. In its place was silence, an oppressive, deafening absence of sound that seemed to swallow everything around it whole. And amidst this silent void, one word echoed through my mind like a gunshot. Arlo. My name whispered directly into my ear by something unseen yet undeniably present. The cat's fur clinked softly in response, as if marking the beginning of another chapter in our shared nightmare. I traced the letters with a numb fingertip, the plaster cold and granular beneath my touch. Harrington, my name. Or what tweet had he been my name? The etching wasn't recent. It felt old. Like the hand that carved it had long since dissolved into dust. Yet the pressure remained, a phantom indentation against the wall. The fungi pulsed, a slow bioluminescent heartbeat, illuminating the grooves, turning the letters into slick, viscous channels. It wasn't the sight of the name that unsettled me, but the way it felt twinty, a forgotten limb reawakening, a phantom pain. The clock's tick wasn't a tick anymore. It spat static. Each beat, a burst of white noise that tasted like lead on the back of my tongue. A metallic grit coating my teeth, a phantom burn in my throat. It wasn't just sound, it was texture, a particulate assault on my senses. The air itself vibrated, a low hum that resonated in my bones, blurring the edges of my vision. I blinked, trying to focus, but the blue glow of the fungi seemed to intensify, bleeding into the periphery, dissolving the room into an amorphous, undulating mass. Silas moved, a silver ripple against the grey concrete. His fur clinked against the wall, a delicate chime that felt deliberately discordant against the static's roar. Clink, clink, clink. Each chime was a tiny hammer blow against my skull. He was fixated on the name, his obsidian eyes reflecting the pulsing blue. Then, nothing at all. He wasn't looking twined at it, but through it, as if reading something I couldn't see. He was marking it, claiming it, as if the inscription was a territory he needed to possess. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, congealed, like trying to inhale through cotton. The static grew, morphing into a distorted, fragmented voice. Not words, not exactly. More like the remnants of speech, fractured and rearranged into something inhuman. A chorus of whispers, all layered on top of each other, all saying nothing. It was a cacophony designed to dismantle language itself. My hand trembled as I continued to trace the letters. Rindton. Each stroke felt like an act of desecration, a violation of something sacred. Or perhaps a reclamation. Was this a warning? A claim? A revelation? I couldn't tell. I only knew that the static was getting worse, the taste of lead more pronounced, the feeling of wrongness more pervasive. It wasn't the sound itself that was the problem. It was the way it was twin-changing me. It was rewriting my internal landscape, replacing memories with static, emotions with numbness. Silas's fur clinked again, louder this time, more insistent. He pressed against the wall, his body a silver crescent against the etched name. And then, the wall thimbled dive. Not water, not blood, but something darker, thicker, more viscous. A slow, creeping blackness oozing from the inscription, spreading across the concrete like a malignant growth. It wasn't wet, wasn't sticky. It was empty, a void manifesting as substance. The blackness tasted like nothing, an absolute absence of flavor, a hole in my palate. The air grew colder, not a physical chill, but a coldness that seemed to originate from within my own core. It wasn't the temperature that was dropping, but my capacity to feel temperature. The static peaked, a deafening roar that obliterated all other sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. It was inside me now, vibrating my teeth, rattling my bones, rewriting my thoughts, and then the blackness reached my hand, enveloping my fingers, creeping up my arm. It didn't burn, didn't sting, it simply absorbed, a slow, painless erasure. The clinking of Silas's fur was the last sensation I registered before the wall fully surrendered to the void. The fungi pulsed in time with the clock, their blue glow casting an eerie circuit board light across the concrete floor. Silas's metallic fur clinked against the edge of the drain like distant, discordant church bells tolling for some forgotten sinner. I watched his tail disappear into the blackness as he slipped down the hole, his silver body swallowed by shadows that seemed to ripple and shift like liquid night. The clock hands snapped backward with a sound like gunshots echoing through an empty cathedral. Each snap was another hammer blow against my skull. each reverberation sending shards of static piercing into my mind. The taste of lead filled my mouth, coating my teeth in gritty metallic dust. It felt as if something was clawing at the edges of my consciousness, trying to drag me under. I leaned over the drain, the cold concrete pressing against my forehead like a lover's icy kiss. My breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, each exhale echoing down into the darkness below. The clock hand snapped again, and this time I felt it physically, a jarring shockwave that rattled my bones and shook loose something deep within me. A memory, an emotion, something ancient and buried. Silas's fur clinked louder now, faster, more insistent. It was like he was calling out to me from the depths, beckoning me down into the abyss with him. I could feel it too, that cold, empty void pulling at my core, whispering promises of oblivion in a voice like static. The fungi pulsed brighter still, their glow bleeding into the drain's darkness until all I could see was blue and black swirling together like an oil painting gone mad. The clock hands snapped again, and this time they stayed there, frozen, pointing not at numbers but at something else entirely. Something unseen but felt nonetheless, a weight pressing down on me from all sides. I took one last breath of the thick, cloying air above before stepping into the drain after Silas. The cold wrapped around me like a shroud as I descended into the blue-black gloom, my heart pounding in time with the clock's sudden silence. And then, even that stopped, heartbeat and hands alike frozen mid-beat, swallowed whole by the drain's consuming glow. But there was no end to it. The light just kept going deeper still until all sense of direction lost its meaning entirely. It felt like falling into an endless dream where time held no sway over reality, and I could hear whispers in that void. Whispers of my name echoing through eternity like some twisted mantra. And then came a sound unlike any other. The clock hand snapping forward again with a deafening roar that drowned out even the whisperings of my own damnation. And still, it consumed me whole, swallowing everything I had once been until nothing remained but an empty vessel bobbing in a sea of blue-black light. My hands, slick with something that wasn't quite moisture, traced the seam where metal met concrete. A film not of condensation but of the fungi's luminescence coated my fingertips. It wasn't wet. Not exactly more. Viscous, like touching a thought. The blue pulsed, not a steady beat but a stuttering arrhythmia mirroring the frantic, now subdued hammering in my chest, or what 20 hadoob in my chest. The sensation was fading, not the ache, but the awareness of it. The welding was thorough, a brutal, deliberate closure. The station's engineers, or whatever remnants of them remained, hadn't intended for anyone to leave, or perhaps to enter. The distinction blurred. It didn't matter. The metal radiated a cold that wasn't merely the absence of heat. It felt depleted, as if the warmth had been actively drawn from it, leaving behind a hollow chill that resonated with the emptiness inside me. Each pulse of the fungi tasted different on my skin, sometimes acrid, like burnt sugar. Other times, metallic, mirroring the taste that lingered at the back of my throat. It was a phantom taste, a ghost of something that hadn't happened, or had happened too many times. The clock's tick, a precise surgical incision of sound, pierced my ear canal, not as a volume but as a frequency. It vibrated the bone, the fluid, the very structure of my inner ear, rewriting the architecture of sound itself. I pressed my palm flat against the welded seam, the cold seeping into my bones. The metal yielded nothing. No give, no flex, no sign of weakness. The surface was perfectly smooth, a cold, unyielding plane. I ran my fingers along it, searching for a seam, a flaw, anything. The metallic fur of Silas brushed against my hand, a faint, almost imperceptible clinking. A delicate chime in the face of the relentless clock. He was circling the door, a silver wraith tracing the perimeter of my prison. The air, or what passed for it, felt thick, viscous. It clung to the back of my throat, choking off breath. Each inhale tasted of dust and something else. Something ancient, something forgotten. I leaned closer to the metal, willing it to yield. It wouldn't. The clock's tick grew faster, the intervals shrinking, the sound becoming a high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter the remaining fragments of my composure. Silas's clinking intensified, becoming more urgent. A frantic percussion against the metal. He wasn't merely circling the door anymore. He was wine-testing coin d'Estaing, it pushing against it with his small silver body. It was a futile effort, a pointless display. And yet, it drew my attention. I focused on the sound, filtering out the clock's maddening rhythm, the fungi's sickening glow. The metal groaned. Not a loud, dramatic protest, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. A yielding. I pressed my ear against the cold surface, straining to hear. A scraping, a grinding. Silas was at it again, his fur now a frantic cascade of clinking against the metal. And then a new sound, a high-pitched whine, different from the clock. a sound of metal protesting, straining, giving way. It wasn't the weld itself that was failing. It was the metal around it, the concrete, the very structure of the door. It was as if the welding had merely masked a deeper weakness, a rot that had been spreading for decades. Silas's fur clinked louder still, a triumphant, desperate rhythm. He was pushing, forcing, forthery. The metal, or, rather, the space where the metal had been, a section of the door, no larger than his body, buckled inward. Then another, and another. The fungi's light, once contained, began to bleed through the cracks, illuminating the interior with an eerie, pulsating glow. The clock, for a fleeting moment, fell silent. Then, it resumed its ticking, slower, now heavier, as if burdened by the weight of what was happening. Silas's fur clinked in through the newly formed opening, not against the metal, but to through it. As if the metal hadn't stopped him, hadn't even slowed him. He was already inside, swallowed by the blue-black gloom, his silver body dissolving into the darkness. The fungi's light bled into the widening fissures, illuminating the seal, the metal, the concrete. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that the darkness wasn't contained within the room. It was contained subi within me. The fungi pulsed against the metal, a slow, wet heartbeat against my palm. I smeared my name, Arlo Harrington, over the suicide's final words, the blue light bleeding through the cracks in the station's skin. The fungi's glow tasted like burnt sugar and rust, a phantom flavor that clung to my tongue as I pressed harder. The clock's tick wasn't a sound anymore. It was a vibration in my molars, a drill bit boring through my skull, making the fungi's pulse sync with the rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Thump, like a heart in the wrong place. Silas's fur clinked as he moved, silver threads of metal scraping the cold concrete. The sound was a delicate chime, almost musical, but it cut through the clock's frantic rhythm like a scalpel. I watched his fur ripple, each strand catching the fungi's light, turning the clinking into a silver rain. He circled the door, his small body pressing against the welded seam where the metal met the concrete. I leaned closer, the fungi's light bleeding through the widening cracks, illuminating the rusted gate's inner mechanism. The station's light, once a sterile white, now flickered like a dying bulb, the blue glow seeping through every fracture. Clack, clack, clack. Silas pushed harder, his fur catching on the metal, the sound sharpening into a high-pitched scrape. I pressed my ear to the cold surface, the fungi's pulse now a low thrum against my eardrum. The clock's tick slowed, then stopped entirely. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, viscous, like the fungi itself. I could feel the station holding its breath. Clack, clack, clack. Fato's sound intensified, a rapid staccato against the metal. Silas wasn't circling anymore. He was souventi with the door, his body pressing through the gaps where the metal buckled inward. The fungi's glow spilled into the room, illuminating the rusted hinges, the cracked concrete, the faint blue stains on the walls where the station's light had bled out. I watched the light flicker over my own name, Arlo Harrington, smeared into the metal like a wound. The fungi's glow pulsed once, twice, then stopped. The station's light died, not a fade, not a dimming, a total absolute blackness. The fungi's glow vanished, leaving only the memory of light in my eyes. The clock's tick was gone, the fungi's pulse was gone, Silas's fur was gone. The silence wasn't quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the sound out of existence. I pressed my palm flat against the metal, feeling the cold seep into my bones, the hollow where my chest should be. The fungi's light was gone, but the taste of it lingered, burnt sugar, rust, copper. Clack. Silas's fur clinked against the metal, a single sound, sharp and clear. Then another. And another. The sound wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from twine me. My name, Arlo Harrington, was now a sound in the silence. The sound of the cat's fur clinking into the space where my name had been erased. The station's light was gone. The fungi's glow was gone. But the clink remained a sound without a source, a noise in the void. Clack, 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 clack. The sound grew louder, more insistent, each click a note in a silent song. I felt the name in my throat, the taste of it, the weight of it. The station's light was gone, the clock's tick was gone, but the clink kept coming. Hui, clack, clack, clack. Hui, it wasn't Silas. It was me. It was the name, the name, the name. The sound of the name, the sound of the name, the sound of the name, the sound of the name. The silence wasn't absolute. It was filled with the sound of the name, the sound of the name, the sound of the name. The clink kept coming. A silver rain in the blackness. Phon, clack, 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 clack. The silence was a sound, and it was my name.